how does or do God and Jesus interact with those power structures? What seems to be happening in all those kinds of stories where we've got these firstborns, these secondborns, these people trying to grab for authority and maybe not being able to? Does it seem universal what God is doing with those? Does he seem to always support power structures? Does he seem to always thwart them? Is there a pattern that anyone can think of as they're starting to go through their mind? Let's do some just quick thought on our fast knowledge of the Old Testament while we're seeing that. Grant, go ahead.
God seems to be sending a message that all authority and power comes from him. It's not just up to us to decide who's in charge.
That's profoundly right, I think. But continue. Either you continue or want to add too.
Well, it was the people who asked, I was thinking it was the people who asked for the kings. And God said, I am king. But the people could not accept that, would not accept that. So he let them have kings, but then he showed them the trouble that kings brought.
Right. Much to Samuel's chagrin, you let them have kings. Although, in an odd sort of foreshadowing way, there are already laws written into the Mosaic Law about, and by the way, when you finally get a king, that word's already buried in there hundreds of years before it ever comes about, right? Logan, I saw you back there with him.
Yeah, so I think historically we see God utilize his power structure to develop the that he needs in the people that are going to bring about meaningful change on behalf of the chosen people in the Old Testament, for instance. So, if you look at the case of Moses, Moses is placed in a basket as a baby under intense persecution from Pharaoh. And Pharaoh's killing all the Jewish babies except for this particular one who happens to survive. And he happens to be raised in the royal household, happens to be known to Pharaoh, happens to have this incident where he ends up in exile in the middle of the wilderness and is learning the Red Sea area and learning the area where the Israelites will ultimately end up, and is ultimately chosen to go deliver a message, right? Like, a lot of things have to line up for Moses to be the person that God needs to deliver Israelites from the land of Egypt, right? A lot of things have to line up for Joseph to be the person to go and save his family and to keep the lineage moving, right? So I think, honestly, the big takeaway for us is that, earthly power structures will come and go, but in each of us, God is trying to develop something that he can utilize for greater good. And we have to have this belief that as threads, we don't see the whole tapestry, and we don't necessarily see where it's all going, or the butterfly effect we all have until maybe long beyond the time we're dead, and God shows us where we fit in the great scheme of things.
Absolutely. And in fact, that's between you and Grant, I've got some profound stuff going on that's going to jump ahead in my lesson too far, but we'll do a little more for sake of time, and then we'll do it. Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, just to support kind of what Logan was saying, that God's the creator of order and structure. You see that from the beginning. You look at the 12 tribes. You look at how he organized his people with Moses. There's different roles that he wanted with organization, and then all the way to the New Testament and the church and the structure. So God uses that for his purposes, and the design is used to serve him and what it is he's trying to accomplish in the world. And power is different in God's kingdom, right, versus the earthly kingdom. I think we'd all agree on that. And versus earthly power, right? So, so God relates to structure in that he created structure, and we as humans try to replicate that in some way in our earthly organizations, but we do it not in a good way sometimes because we abuse that power.
Right, in our own earthly wisdom. Yes, go ahead.
When the priests were supporting the power structure, Israel thrived. When they went south, then Israel went south.
That is very true. And so what we get is kind of a mixed bag of God's support of power structures, because it ends up being sort of a yes and no. And if I can get two scripture reading volunteers real quick, I'm going to keep talking for a minute, but I'll tell you what your scriptures are so you can turn to them. Just need two hands of someone who wants to talk but not make a comment out of their own brain per se. Yes, you're going to do Isaiah 55, 8 and 9. And Wes, you're going to do Matthew 23, 2 and 3. So we end up with this mixed bag. I mean, think about this. First of all, there's support going on. When the snake, whatever he is, usurped the authority of the dominion of humankind against him and speaks up and talks back to Eve and tells her how it's supposed to be when he should be not and she should be having dominion over that snake. He broke the power structure and God punished him for it. He said, nope, power structure was supposed to be there. Humankind, Adam and Eve, bucked the power structure of God, who said, eat everything, not that tree. But they ate it. And they too had their exile and mercy in that process too. And even things such as David respecting God's anointed even after David was anointed. David had already been anointed by Samuel. He was ready to be the next king, has the opportunity to take Saul out, but respected the power structure that God had put into place, said, I'm not going to lay a hand on God's anointed. Let God take care of him when God takes care of him. And in light of that, we even see it coming through into the New Testament. And Wes, can you read us Matthew 23, 2 and 3?
The scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat, so do and observe whatever they tell you, but not the words they do, for they preach, but they do not practice.
So what is Jesus saying to the people around him who are following him to a massive level that's starting to become a political threat and a thing that is going to end up winding up getting him killed? There's all these people in front of him ready to support Jesus, and what does he say?
Do what they say, but don't do like they do.
Right. The teaching authority, the power structure they have in what they're doing for you in giving you the Word of God out of the Old Testament is still valid. Please listen to what they teach you. Now, don't go act like them, because they're not acting very appropriately. But what they're actually doing for you is good. And then we have this whole series of times in which, obviously, the power structure, like Logan was talking about, this idea that the tapestry is there, that we have no idea. He's so often picking second or junior borns, these folks that we wouldn't have expected. You've got your Abel, your Seth, your Abram, who's third born. You've got your Judah, fourth born. You've got Moses, third born. You've got David, the youngest of 7. You've got all those situations. But he also, takes the kingdom completely away from Rehoboam because of his actions. And actually, well, because Solomon's actions, but, cascade down. Takes Israel and Judah into captivity despite being his chosen kingdom. And then later takes those power structures out. There's all these sorts of times when God is flipping the script. And as Grant also said, it seems like it's just completely unknown what his own purpose is going to be. And that's what brought me to Isaiah 55, 8, and 9 in this situation. And go ahead, fire away, Isaiah 55, 8, and 9.
For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts.
Right. So we see these firstborn skippings, these humble raised, these usurpers condemned. We see the unlikely honored. And then you go look at the genealogy of Jesus himself, and you see a sex worker, you see a non-Israelite, you see, all kinds of things going on in there that are highlighted even within his own genealogy to show that the long thread that it took to get to where I brought my son to earth, says God, had all of this in that history. Those are some ways that are pretty high above our ways, and thoughts that are pretty high above our thoughts. So now that we've talked about how God's holy plan, his purpose, his set-aside pattern of how he was going to do this and who he was going to give honor to and who he was going to take honor away from, are part of his holy nature. And we're called on to be holy as God is holy, even if we know we are never going to 100% grasp that until he perfects us in the end. But that's going to be our job, is to carry with us that abundant, fascinating fullness out into this world. So how do we have our holiness as we interact with power structures? I know, I like these ones. These are those questions that put people a little quiet. All right, I got 3 hands, so let's start. Luke, Grant, Ed.
Well, you talked about Adam and Eve and how they had authority given, they were told what to do and they didn't do it. I really like what God's interaction with Cain in Genesis 4:7. If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. I mean, God's delegated authority here to Cain and said, look, it's up to you. You can either go do an acceptable offering, or you can let sin rule over you. And I'm telling you, you need to rule over sin.
Yeah. Well, essentially that crouching at the door, it's a noun. We use a verb there for some reason, but croucher, it makes me think of the idea of dominion over the creeping things, right? From the beginning, have dominion over the creeping things. Sin is now creeping at your door. It's right there. It's a creeping thing crouching right in front of you, right? And don't make mom and dad's mistake. Have the dominion over the thing. It's there.
The whole mystery of the Bible is ruling over sin and doing what God wants.
Right. Inside of ourselves, exactly. Grant.
You see, I see in the scriptures, especially in the New Testament, we have, God of the flesh, a submission power structure, so recognition of them, even if they aren't necessarily behaving the way you would want them to. Jesus, like, as you pointed out, saying they seated themselves in the seat of Moses, but do what they say. You have Paul essentially apologizing for insulting the high priest because he says, I didn't realize he was the high priest. So he still submits to that authority, but at no point do they engage themselves in sinful behavior or behave like those individuals, but they respect the structure. And this is where we come back to your difference in the beginning, the difference between the structure and the person in charge.
Right. There's a position there that they're gonna respect, right up, and we're gonna talk about the very slim instances in which that wasn't done. Go ahead, Steve.
The Pharisees wanted to trip Jesus up, and they asked him, is it legal to pay taxes to Caesar? And Jesus asked for a coin, and they gave him a coin, and he says, whose inscription is on there? And they said Caesar.
Right.
And Jesus says, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar.
He says, basically, what's your problem then? He says essentially, what's your problem then? Right? He kind of throws it right back in their face. And there's a nice deep dive on that too, because there was even a usurping current sort of attempt at overthrow of the current Caesar by someone off in the farther east part of the kingdom. And so there was even a subtle or subtext of, do we pay taxes to that Caesar? Do we pay taxes to that Caesar? Do we pay taxes at all? I mean, it was almost like a no good answer kind of situation. And so putting it back on them was, a wise choice.
Let's go back to the Old Testament law where he said, don't curse the king and don't curse God. He puts the two together. And then you get up to Jesus and he says, as was said, we've got to remember that there's obligations we owe to God because we're in his image. And then there's money that's created in the image of Caesar, so that there are kind of differences. Then when Paul gets to applying it in Ephesians, Colossians, Peter talks about it, Titus talks about it, or Paul talks about it to Titus, you get a little bit more granulation about, okay, here's what that looks like. Romans 13, 1 Peter 2 are the kind of famous places, moving out of Jesus' statement that Steve had, moving out of the law. So there's always been a way of looking at this where we do those things unless it's contrary to what we have to do to please God. Right. So there's always a cooperation until you get to that point where they're asking you to do something that is contrary to God, and then it's God rather than man.
Right, and let's touch that one real quick here. So, did I see a hand over here? Sorry, I don't want to. Okay. For some reason, I'm variating left a lot more. I'm not sure if that's just because of the density of population or what's going on here. Yeah, Chris.
I think of love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
And if you think about the stories that we read, specifically in the Old Testament and some of the New, whenever those two things aren't followed, those are the things that make God the most angry, when you don't do those two things. It caused the Babylonian captivity, the Assyrian captivity, the Persian, the Roman occupation. And when the scribes and Pharisees are treating people horribly, God gets very angry, and so does Jesus.
Right.
So how to operate within these power structures, do those two things.
Right. And let's just look at, I'm just going to throw these few examples that I came up with right away up here real quick about when we are underneath the power structure. And if you want to flip to any given one that's kind of one of your favorites, go ahead. We're going to touch on a few of them. I'm not going to be reading them in total because it would, take up all of our time. But if you want to grab those and look at them, Some of the ones I see in here that I find fascinating when we're beneath, and you notice this slide is headed with beneath a power structure because there are going to be some times when we're at the top of a power structure too, or in the middle of it somewhere because of the way we work or the organizations that we do business with or interact with. So one of the ones I find fascinating is the extra mile. Most of the Roman roads had mile markers on them. But even so, every single person who was a non-Roman citizen in an occupied territory knew exactly how many cubit steps it took to get to a mile. And I can promise you that at step number 1858, they were ready to take that backpack and just drop it. They weren't handing anything back kindly or with a like, oh, thank you for letting me do my mile duty for you, soldier. That was not the case. They were dropping it and heading back to where they got interrupted as fast as they could. Imagine the Jesus Kingdom style fascination of a Roman soldier and a group of soldiers marching along a road who've captured a few people, and some of them are followers of Christ. And step number 1858 comes along, and all of a sudden step 1859 happens, and 60, and 61, and 62, and some of the soldiers are busy picking up their stuff from the people who weren't Jesus Kingdom people and trying to catch up with the fact that the ones who have these folks going extra have experienced actually something different. This was not a fair law. No one loved this law. This isn't telling them to obey a law you liked. This was a law nobody liked and was completely onerous. And then you see two types of taxes, both the temple tax and the civic taxes, and both of those examples are ones in which Jesus even says, look, I'm God's son. I shouldn't have to pay anything to go into the house of my father, but go catch a fish. You're going to find 2 drachmas in there. Go take it and pay the tax. So, and then, his illegal arrest in the garden, a nighttime arrest without a proper authority of anything. Peter's reaction, start chopping people up. Jesus' reaction was to be led away, despite any kind of authority that he had or could have called down on that situation. And as was already brought up, Paul respecting the high priest after being slapped. He gets slapped. He's like, why are you slapping me? God's going to slap you, you whitewashed wall. Okay, he shot off fast on that person. And then, hey, are you insulting the high priest? He's like, oh, never mind. Didn't know you were the high priest. That's a rule. I'm not going to do it incorrectly with that. And let's go to Ephesians 5 because there's an interesting flip of 2 things there that happens in Ephesians 5. Ephesians 5, 5 through 9, we cover both the person beneath and the person above. And it's interesting to me because it says, bondservants, obey your earthly masters with fear and trembling, with a sincere heart, as you would Christ. Not by eye service as people pleasers, but as bondservants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, rendering service with a good will as to the Lord and not as to man. Knowing that whatever good anyone does, this he will receive back from the Lord, whether he's a bondservant or is free. And then it turns the script on us, and we'll come to that part of the turn of the script in the very next slide. But whether you are an actual bondservant, the proper word here is just slave. Whether you are a slave here, we sort of Americanize it for palatability, but whether you're a slave, a paid servant, or a household member underneath, if there's a master above you, work for them, and not grumbling your way along every step of the way and doing a cut corner job on everything you can and just hoping one day that comes to bite the master back when he doesn't realize what a bad job you've done. But instead doing it as unto the Lord. And then of course 1 Timothy calls upon us to pray for all people in charge, including kings and those in authority. So what about, and then of course we see the defiance of the council in Acts 4. That's our one narrow example, right? That's our example that was brought up. I'm trying to remember, I want to say, was that you, Ed, that brought up the narrow example? But said that if it comes to an actual head-to-head clash, when the council told Peter and John, don't preach in the name of Jesus anymore. That's that narrow instance when they said, I'm just going to have to say no to you. They didn't do it defiantly. They didn't do it violently. They didn't do it by trying to overthrow the whole power structure of the Sanhedrin. They just said politely, thank you, but no thank you. We'll be carrying on what we're doing. And of course, that leads to their arrest and then their eventual miraculous release from jail and all kinds of stuff where God showed his own desire to put that authority place back in its position. And then what about when we're in charge? Let's look at the few that I found that were very quick, good examples of ones that are in charge. All right. The biggest in charge in the world, in the history of the world, Jesus on earth, God on earth. And he takes the most subservient position, washes their feet, and then says to them, if you understand what I've done to you, this is what you're going to be doing. When James and John, Boanerges, our sons of thunder, decide to come along and say, hey, once you've got that throne over in Jerusalem, because their heads were still in the wrong spot, let us sit on your left and your right. And he said, you don't even understand. I didn't come to be served. I came to serve. And if you're going to be great, you're going to be a servant. You're going to be underneath and giving your abundance to others so they can see kingdom people inside of you. And then, of course, back to our Ephesians verse. So when we get to verse 9, it says, so we just got through this litany of what bondservants are supposed to do, right? Fear, trembling, sincere heart, not eye service. Rendering it as to the Lord, not to man. Masters, do the same to them. Woo! We flip the script there. It's a very similar flipping of the script that we see in Romans 12, 9, and 10 when we are called upon to show love and sincerity and to outdo one another. It's a sporting type of word, to outdo, to outcompete one another. Me and Mike McCollum are supposed to be outcompeting each other all the time on, can I show him more honor? Can he show me more honor? And then can I show him more honor? You know, it's almost like the polite fight at that point. Ed, I saw your hand pop up.
You have a typo. It should be 6'9" instead of 5'9", so just make a note of that.
Yeah, and on the
Oh, yes, you're right. 5's on my far left of my Bible. 6 is buried in the text. My apologies. 6. Thank you. I will fix those for the next time this lesson gets asked for, which will be quarter to never. Yes, go ahead.
I see this as a learning procedure for a lifetime of all of us to prepare us for the adoption that has been promised. That adoption is only going to be available to those who qualify themselves to be adopted. And that is, all of this applies to them, to us, so that we have made ourselves ready for God.
Just like Isaiah's experience of holiness. Be ready. Humility and then readiness to serve. And then even Jesus, again, the top of the heap, God on earth. He doesn't go starting to unwind all the Pharisaical structures. Instead, he just pronounces these woes. I'm so sad. It's so defeating that you did so many of these things this way. This is what it seems to come down to. Our interactions with these power structures is a position of service in almost every single way. And in fact, when we look at our current era, I just want to leave you with the thoughts of this. We have a very unique slice of current era right here. These things you see listed up here have happened only for a narrow fraction of human history. I mean, a super narrow fraction of human history. Most have had the opposite of democracy, the opposite of free speech, the slowest forms of communication that have existed on the planet, and communication as one-to-one. With all of these opportunities here to show what we are like and what kind of people we will be, it's an exercise of caution and carefulness in how we speak, to who we speak, and about whom we speak and what we say. Because how we act in service is going to show whether or not we have God's abundance, his fullness, these working thesis items, his abundance, his fullness, his readiness to call others to a higher purpose, and a purpose of abolishing death, not worrying about a world that's not our home, worrying about the matters of God and putting our energy into that. And so I think we're wrapping a bell right here nicely. All right, had to speed through a few. Thank you all for your attention and for your interaction. It was great, and I'll see you next time I'm up here. Thank you.